Radio Show.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in today to the 25th hour radio show here on Monster Radio AM 1150. I am your host, Rob Fairless, and on the phone with me today is an author who has had numerous New York Times bestsellers, Mr. David Morrell. David, thank you for taking time out of your day to join me on the show.
Oh, I'm happy to do it. I love radio.
So, David, let's start from the very beginning and give the listeners a little background information about you. What was your inspiration to becoming a writer, a novelist in the first place?
I was 17 years old and confused. I wasn't doing very well in school, and I just had a lot of troubles. And I was watching a television show on the first Friday of October of a long time ago in 1960, premiered at 8:30, and it was called Route 66. And it was about two young men in a Corvette convertible driving across the United States. And the show used to say they were in search of America and in search of themselves. And there was something about that whole concept about moving on and finding and having adventure. And I noticed that week after week, almost all the time, the same writer did the script. His name was Stirling Silliphant, later to receive an Oscar for In the Heat of the Night. And I fell in love with his dialogue and the way he told stories, and I wrote him a letter finally and said I wanted to be him, and he sent me back a very long letter telling me what I needed to do, and from that time on I was focused on being a writer.
So you really hit it out of the park with your rookie novel First Blood, introducing the world to the eventual household name of Rambo. What got the wheels spinning upstairs to have that type of character represent your debut novel?
I was, by then, the first part of what I said happened in Canada, in southern Ontario. I was born and raised in Canada. But by then I had, to everyone's surprise, and largely due to Stirling's influence, I had migrated to the United States and was taking courses at Penn State. And it was this was in the late 60s when all the turmoil to do with the Vietnam War occurred. Many riots. In 1968, there were several hundred riots in the United States, and campus protests and things of that nature. And as a Canadian immigrant, I was not allowed to have a political opinion, so I kept my thoughts to myself. But it seemed to me that the division in the country was so wide and so violent that there was a potential for something like a civil war. And I got the idea of a Vietnam veteran, since all this was largely caused by Vietnam, by a Vietnam veteran returning to the United States, and that he would be in shock about what had happened to him in Vietnam, and that he would come in contact with a law enforcement officer who didn't like the way he looked. And the whole thing was predicated that in those days, hippies, as they were called, had the long hair and the beard, and they were scruffy clothes, and police officers did not like them. And as a research, I had begun dressing that way, and I can confirm that I was hassled a number of times because of the way I looked. And so I got to thinking, what if one of these hippies was the fastest gun in the West, so to speak? I thought of it often as a Western, and that, Rambo would be trying to find his way, and they wouldn't let him, and he would explode in outrage at the way he was being treated. A footnote: the person I had in mind as the model was a well-known actor, Audie Murphy, who had been America's most decorated soldier of World War II, and who had a extreme difficulty adjusting to peacetime, and carried a gun, and he had a lot of trouble.
Now, if I'm reading correctly here, it's saying that the novel itself came out in 1972, and the film version of the book released 10 years later in 1982. Now, when you first were approached about First Blood actually being adapted into a motion picture, was it something that came right out of the blue? Was it a surprise to you?
Well, authors have agents, people who are specialists in placing books with publishers, and if they're fortunate, with film studios. And my agent had sent copies of the book to various people out there, as they say in Hollywood, and it had landed on the desk of somebody who thought that it would be a good piece for a well-known at the time writer, producer, director named Richard Brooks, perhaps most famous for doing In Cold Blood. And so Columbia Pictures acquired the property for film rights for Richard Brooks. He worked on it for a year. Something happened, and I never know what it was, but Columbia sold it to Warner Brothers, where there was a chance for Martin Ritt to direct it with Paul Newman playing the police officer, not Rambo. And then that morphed into Sidney Pollack directing with Steve McQueen as Rambo. But McQueen was too old for the role. He was 45 at a time when there were no 45-year-old Vietnam veterans. And so one thing led to another. There were 26 scripts. 3 to 5 studios involved, and finally a company called Carolco decided to make it and hired Ted Kotcheff to direct, and then eventually hired Sylvester Stallone as the title character.
Now, as the actual creator of Rambo, did you have any say-so on how the film was made?
None, tangentially. I was very close to one of the producers, Andrew Vanya, and he called me one day. He said that they were thinking the novel is set in Kentucky, but they were thinking of moving it to Canada. Which would pose as some place like Oregon, because in Canada they could get favorable financing. So he phoned one day and asked if there was anything in the story that would prohibit it from being filmed effectively, set in the Pacific Northwest, and I said there was not. And they finally moved forward and made the film. When you are talking about a major Hollywood film, it is very, very rare that the author. It happens occasionally. It's so rare that when it does happen, people think it's worth noting. But as a rule, the author is not consulted. So I wasn't surprised that I didn't have anything to do with the choices that were made.
Now, did Stallone ever reach out to you to personally get the inside track on the mind and thinking of John Rambo?
Not at that time. Not for First Blood. He and I began, I can't say we're friends, but we talk on occasion. He and I spoke when Rambo First Blood Part 2 had finished filming. We spoke more when Rambo 3 was filming, and we spoke, I remember he phoned me when he was doing the 4th Rambo film and wanted to tell me that he wasn't that, in retrospect, happy with the 2nd and 3rd film because of their jingoism, but that he still stood behind the 1st film and that he wanted the 4th film to be, to have the mood that I had tried to create in the novel of this very angry man because of what war had done to him. So I can't say that he ever asked me my opinion, but he did on occasion. We sometimes talk on the phone. There was a chance for a 5th film a couple of years ago, and he and I talked every weekend for about 2 months, 2 hours a day. But nothing ever came of it, which is pretty typical in the movie business.
Now, were you pleased with the outcome of First Blood, the film? I mean, did it do the book justice, in your opinion?
Well, there are differences, but before I give them, let me tell you, Stephen King once told me that he thought First Blood treated the author about as well as possible because he could actually recognize the plot, and that he'd had a couple of films made based on his work where he didn't recognize the plot. So having said that, there are a couple of significant differences. One is that in the novel, the police officer and Rambo have equal footing. The chapters alternate between them, and they have equal importance. In the movie, Rambo and Sylvester Stallone, and this is what happens when you have a major star, rose so that he dominated the story. In addition, and this is a spoiler, so somebody put their hands over your ears if this is going to be news to you. But in addition, in the novel, Rambo dies. He is killed by the man who trained him, by Colonel Troutman. In the movie, there were significant debates in-house in the production company about how the book should end. How the film should end. And the the version that was shown to a Las Vegas test audience had Rambo die by suicide. And the audience was so upset because by then the character had been changed. In my novel, he is furious about what he has learned about himself and his capacity for violence. In the film, he is morphed into a victim. And with Sylvester's wonderful deer-like eyes, he just exudes sympathy. So the fact became that you can't, at that point, kill the character because he's too sympathetic, whereas in mine, he's a warrior. Somebody once joked that the novel is war as hell and the movie is war as heck, because it reduced the intensity of the emotion. So the ending was now unacceptable as they had envisioned it, and so they went back to Canada and filmed a new ending in which Rambo lived. So there are, those two significant differences, and three, I guess, because the character is reinterpreted.
Now, even though Stallone, is the face people think of when you hear the word Rambo, you're the creator of this character. Do you ever just sit back and think how you sort of inadvertently skyrocketed the sale of like survival knives, and no telling how many young men who volunteered for the military to become a John Rambo type soldier?
It is, it's a two-part question. First of all, in terms of the knives and all, the cutlery industry was in decline when the first Rambo film came out, and famous knife maker in the world of knife making, Jimmy Lyle, was hired to produce what is now the famous Rambo knife, and it rejuvenated the knife making industry. So people who were motivated to make knives not for use, but just as objects of art, suddenly had a chance to make a living. And this went on with, the second Rambo movie and the third Rambo movie. And, it changed things. And I have to laugh, in the novel, Rambo does not use a knife. But many years ago, the Blade magazine gave me a Industry Achievement Award for revolutionizing the cutlery industry, even though I had nothing to do with it. So it's kind of amusing. Now the other is far more serious. I was part of the first author USO tour to go to a war zone. Specifically, we went to Iraq in 2010. The theory being that there are people in the military in combat who aren't necessarily interested in talking to cheerleaders or sports stars, which is often what most USO tours consist of. And so we went over and we hung around the USO part of the base, and we spent a lot of time talking to authors. And many of the people I spoke to had joined the military because of the second and third Rambo film. And I, as I acknowledged to them, I have a great responsibility here because I'm indirectly I had created something which made people put themselves in harm's way, and but they countered to me that yes, it could be looked at that way, but that the choice was theirs, and that their primary concern was to be loyal to the United States and to protect it. So it's every time I hear about somebody who's killed or injured in warfare, I worry that they might have been in that place because there I was as a graduate student in the late 1960s writing this novel in a different context. But as they said, the choice ultimately was theirs.
It's funny you speak about a fifth Rambo movie. I was sitting at home the other day thinking about this interview, and an idea had popped inside my head. if Stallone decides to do another Rambo film, and all the fans out there like myself know that Rambo is wanting to return home in the movie to his family, his father.
Yes.
Wouldn't it be cool if in the final movie he finally comes face to face with his father, and that character is played by you? Wouldn't that be cool?
Oh, that's very amusing. That's funny. That's a new one. People come to me with different thoughts, but that's a new one. Let me tell you a little bit about this. Sly and I, as I said 2 years ago, spent a lot of time on the phone, and we had worked out a story that we were very happy with. And there were, for whatever reason, in the people that he works with, the studio, I have no idea what the complication was, but they did not like the story we had worked out. And Sly finally said that he didn't want to do this anymore. He had broken his neck making the Expendables. He has a plate in the back of his neck. A lot of bones over the years have been broken, particularly in the Rambo films. And what he said to me is, he said, David, as I think about this, I've got my family, I've got my painting, I've got my golf. Why do I want to injure myself anymore? And this was partly in disillusion because we were very excited about the story, but couldn't get the traction to get it made. So he, a few months later, issued a press release in which he was basically retiring from the character, and I haven't heard any indication of him wanting to change his mind.
Now, could you write a book ending the story?
I could, but it's an interesting thought. Here's the problem. Since Sylvester and I worked on the story together, he would now, in effect, be a co-author. And I suspect that by the time all the contracts, if I want to write a book, I just write a book. But if I talk to somebody for 8 weekends, roughly maybe 16 hours, working out a story, that story isn't really mine anymore. It's ours, and I have no idea how he'd feel about if I did it. Plus, there's the other problem.
I mean,
Rambo died.
Yeah, Rambo died. I was going to say that. I thought about that when you was talking. Well, Rambo has died.
Now it gets complicated because fans know that I wrote novelizations for the second and third movies, in which I expanded the stories and inserted the sort of thing that I thought would have been fun to have in the film, such as making a lot more of the fact that in the second film, that's the prisoner of war camp where he was held and to which he's going back, and what kind of emotions would that have in him, and emotions that are not dealt with at all in the film. And in the third film about Afghanistan, to investigate the fact that Afghanistan was for Russia what Vietnam was for the United States in terms of a destabilizing political and financial situation. So I had a chance in both those books, and I had unusual freedom from the production company to do this, to add elements that I thought were important that maybe there wasn't room in the movie. And just add parenthetically, there's a company, a publisher called Gauntlet Press, Gauntlet Press, which for the last 3 years we have been releasing collectors hardbacks of First Blood, Rambo First Blood Part 2 and Rambo 3, which are the definitive editions. They're not only hardbacks, in some cases there were none for the novelizations, but more than that, unpublished chapters, definitive background essays. It's just posters. I have Kirk Douglas, for example, was Colonel Troutman until he bowed out, and they had artwork for him and posters. So I have in these things curiosities like this, where Sylvester Stallone and Kirk Douglas in First Blood, that kind of thing. So if anybody's a true fan and wants to know what I think are the essential bits that everybody would want to have in terms of these three novels that go to Gauntlet Press. There are only 500 copies. These are for collectors, 500 copies signed and numbered. So anyway, Gauntlet Press.
Well, I don't want to stay too much on First Blood in this interview because you've written so many other award-winning novels over your career. What's your latest book you've released, or is there one you're about to release that you would like the listeners to know about?
So my most recent book, it's part of 3 books. I like to find new ways to write action and suspense. And so starting in 2013, I wrote 3 books that were set in 1850s London, that wonderful Gothic, Victorian, haze-filled, fog-filled streets. And the first book was called Murder as a Fine Art. The second was called Inspector of the Dead. And the third, which came out last November, Ruler of the Night. And all of these are these are novels, but they all are about major Victorian crimes that paralyzed the country, paralyzed England. And I had such a great time writing them. The research, I don't know, the modern world is kind of hostile. I get up in the morning and I look at the news and I say, I wish I were somewhere else. So from 2013 until last year, in my mind, I was able to escape to this wonderful fog-bound, different world. And I researched it so carefully that readers have said, Entertainment Weekly, in fact, said this, that they actually felt they were in 1850s London, in the prisons, and in the alleys and on the trains. And, it was just very exciting to write, and I decided I'd do 3 of them, and so that part's done now.
Now, from your debut work of First Blood in 1972 to your latest work, has your style of writing changed, or has the passing of time changed you in any way as it pertains to your work?
The style, for me, what a book is about is it determines how you write it. So like First Blood was about these 2 people who didn't understand each other and just wanted to fight with each other. And so the alternating chapters in First Blood, it was almost as if the structure was dictated by the theme. And over the years, I've found different ways of telling the story that are a way of making the theme more vivid. I'll give you the easiest example is when I wrote Murder as a Fine Art, Inspector of the Dead, and Ruler of the Night, I was, since they're set in 1850s London, I thought, why not make them feel a little bit like novels that were published at that time, a sort of a Victorian novel about Victorian novels. And so I had a lot of fun doing that. The truth is that a career in literature and in novels normally lasts, for a successful writer, normally lasts about 20 years. And the reason for that is that the writer gets tired of doing the same thing again and again, and the reader, after a while, gets the idea and stops, says, all right, I'll try somebody else. But what I did, this is my 45th year, it's hard to imagine, 45 years from when First Blood was published, and my goal was to keep evolving, as it were. In the 1980s, I wrote some highly regarded spy novels, and other times I was writing outdoor action novels, and it's been exciting for me to try to find these different ways that make so that my readers know that whenever they pick up something by me, it's not going to be something they've seen before, that it's going to have hopefully a new and exciting way for them to experience the action and the suspense.
Now, what about you personally, outside of what you're known for with your novels? Do you have any hobbies or outside interests that you participate in just to get away from all the hustle and bustle of everyday life?
Well, a lot of my hobbies are predicated upon the research I do. I'm a private pilot, for example. I wrote a novel called The Shimmer in 2009, which is about the mysterious, these are real, the mysterious Marfa lights of West Texas. They're real. I've seen them. They're unexplained, but oh my heavens, are they hypnotic? And they've been appearing since the mid-1800s. And aircraft had been used at one time to chase them. And then on one occasion, the lights actually chased the aircraft. And I know this sounds wild, but it's there, and you can go down and see these things. And so I knew that I'd need an airplane sequence in the book. And I thought, well, I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and we have a flight school here. So I thought, I'll go down, and they can fly me around a little bit, and I'll get a sense of what it's like to handle a plane. But I found it so fascinating that I finally said, oh, heck, I'm just going to keep taking the lessons. So eventually I got my private pilot's license, and I've flown considerable distances. So I do that kind of thing. I'm athletic. For a long time, I was tennis was a big thing for me until my knees went. I like gardening. I do, but a lot of it has to do with the kind of research. I once lived in the Wind River Range of Wyoming for 30 days just to see what that was like, so I could write about it. Writing books can really get you a lot of excitement when you're doing the research.
Now, have you embraced social media as a way to interact with your fans?
I have. It took me a while to figure out how to do it. I'm on Twitter, but Twitter, it's limited. It's just a few lines and I'm on Twitter every day. But mostly Facebook is what I'm interested in. And, if you go on social media, it's all these darn authors. You see either pictures of animals, pets, pictures of some food somebody's cooked, which I confess in one case I did the same thing.
Yeah, I'm guilty.
Or you see, vacation photos, which is kind of cool for social media. Or you see authors saying, buy my book, buy my book, buy my book. And, it can get a little narrow. And so I was a professor of American literature at the University of Iowa. And I got the idea that maybe my Facebook page could be kind of like a really cool classroom where I would talk about the books I was reading, about the movies I was seeing, about the music I was listening to. And in fact, I put a lot of this stuff together in a book called Stars in My Eyes, My Love Affair with Books, Movies, and Music. It's a collection of essays about people like Frank Sinatra and Steve McQueen. And in any case, like last week, my wife and I went to see Wonder Woman, and were really, really impressed by the fact that it had a coherent narrative, which is not what a lot of superhero movies have, and the fact that Patty Jenkins, female director, the first female director to have a film that premiered with more than $100 million at the box office. This is unheard of. So I did a bunch of stuff about Wonder Woman last week. At the same time, if there's a book that really excites me, a novel or nonfiction, what have you, I'll talk about that. And people tell me, I have about 19,000 people who follow me, and people tell me that they go to the Facebook page for, as it were, tips about what to read or what movies to see or what TV to watch, or just talks about what it's like to be a writer and things like that. So I find it a wonderful means to communicate.
Now, you have your own website as well, right? People can purchase your books right from your site?
I do. It's davidmorrell.net, not .com, but .net. A photographer has the .com, so if they go there, they're going to see somebody's photographs, and they're good photographs. But davidmorrell.net, I think of it as the network of readers. And if somebody goes to Facebook, I had a friends page for a bit, but you've got to top off at 5,000, and I shut that down, and I have what's called an authors page, and that's how come I can have 19,000 people, and it's very exciting. But if somebody does choose to to look at me on Facebook, it's the author's page they want to look at. It's very easy to find.
So before we wrap things up here, is there anything you would like to mention that I didn't give you a chance to cover, or any words out there for the listeners who are fans of your books, anything like that?
Well, often I'm asked about writing. People say, "Do you have any tips for writers?" And I have two tips that I always pass on. One is be a first-rate version of yourself and not a second-rate version of another author. In other words, don't imitate. And the second one is don't chase the market, because it moves ahead of you so fast you'll always see its backside. So you have to try to be an original and do things your own way. And if anybody's going to be in Orlando, Florida, in October, I'm doing a one-day, all-day writers' workshop there for the Florida Writers Association. So if there's a modest fee to be part of it, so if anybody cares about that, by all means, sign up.
Well, David, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join me on the show. You've had an outstanding career, and good luck moving forward with that career.
Well, thank you. It's been fun chatting. It's nice to cover a lot of different things, and it's amusing to me when I get asked these questions to sort of remember what it was like back in 1972 when First Blood was published.
I know, man. I can't even remember what happened last week, so you got a pretty good memory.
That's funny.